you're watching this right now, I want you to stay with me until the end. Because what I'm about to tell you, I've never said out loud to anyone outside of this room. And by the time I finish, you'll understand why I stayed quiet for as long as I did. My name is Loretta Mae Simmons. I'm 69 years old. I live in a 3-bedroom house in Decatur, Georgia that I paid off myself in 2019. I have 2 children, a son and a daughter, and 4 grandchildren who call me Nana every Sunday when they remember to call at all. And for the better part of 3 years, my own family thought I was losing my mind. They didn't say it like that, of course. They never do. They said things like, "Mama, we're just worried about you." They said, "You've been forgetting things lately." They said, "You shouldn't be handling all of this alone." And the way they said it, soft, careful, like they were talking to someone fragile, I knew something was happening underneath all that sweetness. I just didn't know yet how far they planned to take it. Let me back up. My husband Gerald passed in the spring of 2021. 34 years we were married. He was a postal worker for 26 of those years, and when he retired, we had a plan. We'd worked for it, saved for it. We had the house, a modest investment portfolio, and 2 life insurance policies, one for each of us. When Gerald died, I received $340,000 from his policy. That's not a secret. My children knew. I didn't hide it from them because I didn't think I had to. That was my first mistake. Not the money, just assuming that people who love you wouldn't see grief as a window of opportunity. My son, I'll call him my son because that's what he is. That's all he gets from me right now. He came down from Atlanta 3 weeks after the funeral, said he wanted to check on me. He brought his wife with him. She has always been polite in the way that costs nothing. Hugs that don't quite land, questions that sound like concern but feel like accounting. They stayed for a week. By the end of that week, my son had walked through every room in my house. He'd asked me twice whether I'd thought about my plans. I asked him what plans he meant. He said, for the house, for your accounts, just in case. I told him I was 67, not 97, and that I still knew how to write a check. He laughed. He let it go. And I told myself I'd misread the situation. I hadn't. 4 months later, my daughter called from Memphis. She and her husband had been talking, she said. They were worried about me being alone. She'd read something, she didn't say where, about elderly women living alone after losing a spouse. The statistics, she said, the isolation, the cognitive decline. I listened to her for about 10 minutes before I said, very clearly, I am not experiencing cognitive decline. She said, "Mama, I'm not saying you are. I'm just saying we love you." I wrote that conversation in my journal that night, not because I thought I'd need it later, just because something about the way she said "we" felt like I'd missed a meeting I hadn't been invited to. That journal. Lord. I want to tell you about that journal. I've kept one since 1987. A composition notebook, usually black and white, one per year. Gerald used to tease me about it, called it my evidence file. He wasn't wrong. I'm a woman who writes things down. Dates, times, what was said, who said it. Old habit. I spent 22 years as a paralegal at a civil litigation firm in downtown Atlanta, Morrison and Keys. I retired in 2018 when my knees started arguing with the parking garage stairs. But the habit of documentation, that never retired with me. So I kept writing. November 2021, son calls. Mentions he knows a financial advisor who specializes in estate planning for widows. I said I already had a financial advisor. He said his contact was better. I wrote it down. February 2022, daughter visits. Brings a brochure for a senior living community in Brentwood. Leaves it on my kitchen counter without mentioning it. I photographed the brochure, write down the date, put it in a folder. March 2022, son visits again with his wife. This time they bring someone, a man named Curtis. Curtis apparently is a family friend who also happens to hold a Georgia license in financial services. They introduce him over dinner like it's casual. Curtis says he'd love to sit down with me sometime. I smile and pass the cornbread. I wrote it all down. What I didn't tell any of them was this. Before I became a paralegal, before I even finished my degree, I spent 8 years as a legal secretary for a guardianship attorney. I typed the motions. I filed the petitions. I sat in those courtrooms. I know exactly what guardianship abuse looks like because I watched it happen to other families for the better part of a decade before I decided I had to find work that didn't keep me up at night. I knew what my children were building toward. I just needed to know how far they intended to go. I didn't have to wait long. August 2022, my son called and said there was going to be a family gathering. Labor Day weekend. His house. He wanted all of us together. Me, his sister, their families. Said it was for the kids, for the grandchildren. Said they missed Nana. I said I'd come. What I did before I came was call my attorney. His name is Robert Fitch. I've used him for estate matters since 2015. I told him what had been happening. Told him about Curtis, about the brochures, about the conversations that kept circling back to my finances and my plans. Robert listened without interrupting. When I finished, he said, "Loretta, I need you to come in this week." I went in that week. We updated my power of attorney documents. We confirmed that my advanced healthcare directive was ironclad and current. Robert also connected me with a colleague of his, a woman named Dr. Annette Price, a licensed clinical neuropsychologist who agreed to conduct a formal cognitive assessment, not because I had any concerns about my cognition, because I wanted documentation. I wanted a piece of paper, signed and dated by a credentialed professional, that said exactly what I already knew, that my mind was sharp, my judgment was intact, and I was not a candidate for any kind of guardianship proceeding. I got that paper on August 19th, 2022. I put it in a manila envelope. I went to my son's Labor Day gathering with that envelope in my bag. The gathering was fine at first. The grandchildren ran around the backyard. Someone put ribs on the grill. My daughter flew in from Memphis and we hugged the way we always do, a little longer than necessary, neither of us quite saying what we mean. Her husband was there. My son's wife moved around the kitchen like she owned the whole weekend. After dinner, when the children had been settled in front of a movie, my son said he wanted to talk. Just the adults. Just family. He sat me down in the living room. My daughter sat across from me. Their spouses were there too. And then Curtis walked in. I want to tell you how I felt in that moment. I want to be honest with you, because I know what you might expect. You might expect me to say I was shocked, or that my heart broke, or that I couldn't believe my own children would do this. But the truth is, I felt something closer to calm, the kind of calm you feel when something you've been preparing for finally arrives. Curtis sat down. He had a folder. Inside were documents, a proposed financial power of attorney that would have given my son full control over my accounts, and a referral letter to a physician for a wellness evaluation. My son slid the folder across the coffee table toward me. He said, "Mama, we've been talking for a long time about this. We just want to make sure you're protected." I looked at my daughter. She looked at the floor. I picked up the folder. I looked at every page. I took my time. Nobody said anything. Then I put the folder down. I reached into my bag. I took out my envelope and I placed it on the coffee table next to his folder. I said, "I appreciate that you love me. I do. But before we go any further, I think you should know that I had a full neuropsychological evaluation completed 10 days ago by Dr. Annette Price at Emory. My score on the MOSA was 29 out of 30. I have no cognitive impairment of any kind. I also met with my attorney last month and my estate documents are fully updated and legally airtight. And finally, I paused here because some moments deserve a pause. Curtis, I spent 8 years working for a guardianship attorney in this state. I know every document in that folder by name, by statute, and by the case law that governs it. Curtis looked at my son. My son looked at me. I said, I love you, but this conversation is over. Nobody said a word for what felt like a full minute. My daughter started crying. Not the kind of crying that's manipulative. Genuinely, she was crying. She said she didn't know it had gone this far. She said my son had been handling things. She said she thought they were just trying to help. I believed part of that. I still believe part of it today. But believing it didn't mean I was going to sign anything. I drove home that night, 2 hours back to Decatur. The highway was dark and quiet, and I kept both hands on the wheel, and I did not cry until I pulled into my own driveway and turned off the engine. Then I sat there for a while. Gerald would have found this whole thing unbelievable. He was the kind of man who thought the best of people right up until the moment he couldn't anymore. I'm built a little differently. I love my children completely, and I do not apologize for also keeping records. The story doesn't end in my son's living room. 3 weeks later, I received a letter from an attorney I did not recognize. His office was in Marietta. The letter informed me that my son, had initiated a petition for limited guardianship over my person and estate, citing concerns about my capacity to manage my financial affairs. I sat with that letter for about 4 minutes. Then I called Robert Fitch. Robert had been doing civil litigation for 31 years. He is not the kind of man who raises his voice. When I read him the letter, he was quiet for a moment, and then he said, Loretta, they have no case, but we are going to make sure of it. We filed a response within 2 weeks. We attached Dr. Price's full neuropsychological report. We attached my updated estate documents. Robert also subpoenaed my financial records going back 3 years to demonstrate consistent, competent management of my accounts. Regular deposits, no unusual withdrawals, a portfolio that had actually grown since Gerald's passing because I had been paying attention. We also filed a countermotion requesting that the court appoint a guardian ad litem, an independent attorney, to represent my interests, which is standard in contested guardianship cases in Georgia. The guardian ad litem assigned to my case was a woman named Josephine Tate. She called me the first week of October. We talked for 2 hours. The hearing was set for November 14th, 2022. I dressed that morning the way I used to dress for depositions. Navy blouser, pressed slacks, low heels. Gerald's watch, which I wear on my right wrist. I was at the courthouse in Clayton County by 8:15. My son arrived with his attorney. He didn't look at me in the hallway. His wife was there. She did look at me. I looked back. When we entered the courtroom, the judge, the Honorable Sandra L. Kemp, reviewed the initial filings. My son's attorney presented their case, concerns about isolation, concerns about undue financial decisions, a single incident from Christmas 2021 where I had apparently seemed confused about a date. That was their evidence, a holiday party and a feeling. Robert presented ours. He was methodical. He walked through the neuropsychological evaluation, line by line. He walked through the financial records. He walked through the timeline of what I can only describe as a coordinated effort. The visits, Curtis, the Labor Day gathering, the documents, and he laid it out without embellishment because the facts didn't need any. And then Judge Kemp looked up from the file. She looked at me directly. She said, Miss Simmons, I see that before your career as a paralegal you worked in guardianship law specifically. I said, Yes, Your Honor, for 8 years. She held my gaze for a moment. Then she turned to my son's attorney and said, Counselor, I want you to explain to me in detail what evidence of incapacity you have presented today that would meet the statutory standard under Georgia Code 2941, because from where I'm sitting, I'm looking at a woman who understood this proceeding better than most people in this room before it even began. The attorney started to answer. Judge Kemp let him finish. Then she denied the petition. Completely. No conditions, no continuance, no let's revisit in 6 months. Denied. She also noted for the record that the evidence suggested the petition had been filed without adequate factual basis and that any future attempt to refile without significant new evidence would be treated accordingly. We walked out of that courtroom at 11:40 in the morning. Robert shook my hand on the courthouse steps. He said, "You were better prepared than most attorneys I've worked with." I said, "I had a good teacher." Several of them, actually. I didn't look for my son in the parking lot. I didn't need to. That was 2.5 years ago now. My son and I have spoken. It has been careful and it has been slow, and I will not tell you it has been easy. There are things he said in those documents, words like deteriorating judgment and vulnerable adult, that I will be reading for the rest of my life whether I want to or not. Words like that don't just disappear because a judge dismissed them. My daughter and I have a different relationship now than we did before. Quieter in some ways, more honest in others. She came to Decatur in January 2023 and sat at my kitchen table and told me she was sorry. Not a quick sorry, a long one. I listened to the whole thing. I haven't forgotten it. I still live in my house in Decatur. I still manage my own finances. My portfolio is doing fine, thank you. And my journal from 2022, that black and white composition notebook, is in a fireproof box in my bedroom closet. Not because I think I'll need it again, just because I earned every word in it. I want to say something to you before I go, because some of you watching this are living inside a version of what I just described. Maybe it's your children. Maybe it's a sibling. Maybe it's someone who smiled at you over dinner, while quietly trying to figure out what you're worth. Here is what I know. Silence is not the same thing as ignorance. Stillness is not the same thing as weakness. And the most dangerous thing you can do to someone who has spent decades in a courtroom, or near one, is assume that just because she didn't say anything, she wasn't paying attention. I was always paying attention. Write things down. Know your documents. Know your rights. And find yourself a Robert Fitch before you ever need one, because the time to build your foundation is not when the ground is already shaking. I'm Loretta Mae Simmons. I'm 69 years old. I own my home and my mind and my story, and I just decided it was time you heard it. I've thought a lot about what it actually takes for something like this to happen. Not the legal part. I understood the legal part before it ever got that far. I mean the human part. The part where your own son sits across a coffee table from you with a folder of documents and genuinely believes he's doing something reasonable. What I've come to understand is this: people don't usually set out to harm the ones they love. What they do is make a series of small decisions, each one feeling justified in the moment. And they don't stop to look at where the whole chain is leading. My son didn't wake up one morning and decide to become someone who files a guardianship petition against his mother. It happened gradually. One conversation, one "we're just worried," one Curtis brought to dinner. And by the time it reached a courtroom, I think even he had convinced himself it was the right thing. That's the part that stays with me. Not the anger, though that was there too. The part that stays is understanding how people can top themselves into almost anything when money and fear are involved in equal measure. Fear of losing control, fear of being left out. Fear dressed up as love so many times it starts to look the same. And here's what I know about living through something like this. You cannot prepare for it emotionally. You can only prepare practically. I had my documents. I had Robert. I had 2 decades of sitting in rooms exactly like that courtroom, watching how these cases move, knowing which arguments hold and which ones dissolve under scrutiny. None of that stopped it from hurting, but it meant the hurt didn't also cost me my house, my accounts, and my freedom. Loretta, the mother, sat in that living room on Labor Day and felt her heart crack a little. Loretta, the paralegal, picked up the folder, read every page, and knew exactly what to do next. I needed both of those women that day. I won't pretend otherwise. What I want you to take from this, and I mean really take it, not just nod at it, is that intelligence without preparation is just potential. I knew things, but knowing things wasn't enough on its own. I had to act on what I knew before I needed to. The journal, the attorney visit, doctor, Price's evaluation, none of that happened in a panic. It happened quietly, methodically, over months, because I was paying attention and I took my own observations seriously. That's the part most people skip. They notice something feels wrong. They feel the shift in a room when certain topics come up, and then they tell themselves they're overreacting because it's easier to doubt yourself than to accept that someone you love might be capable of this. I almost did that too. I almost put away my journal in February 2022 and told myself I was being paranoid. I'm glad I didn't. Whatever you're carrying right now, whatever situation has you watching videos like this, at whatever hour it is where you are, I want you to trust what you already know. Write it down. Get the right people around you before you need them urgently, and understand that protecting yourself is not a betrayal of the people you love. Sometimes it's the most honest thing you can do. I'm still Loretta Mae Simmons. Still in Decatur. Still writing in my composition notebook every night. And I'm still paying attention.